How you guys doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, here on a Thursday, January 9th, here. Not quite the start of the NFL week like we're typically used to, but I am geared up just because we do have a whole end of the week to weekend plan of just playoff football with the college football playoffs starting today. Obviously, very excited to watch that, and then the other semifinal tomorrow. Then we could start getting into the NFL playoffs. But with being so close to the weekend, I thought I'd start already previewing some of these games, considering there are 6 of them. So we're going to get to 5 over the course of today and tomorrow, and then I'll leave Monday Night Football for next week. So we're going to get into a couple previews today. Also, we're going to be rounding out some of the 49ers' latest moves. There's a couple of, off-season themed moves that they've already made, so I thought they were pretty interesting, and we're going to get to them, as well as a hypothetical scenario towards the end of the show as well. So make sure to stick around for that. But before we get started, a quick reminder to you guys, if you want to get involved with the show through a question, a comment, or just anything that's on your mind, any opinion you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to do so. Any input or insight that you have regarding any topic is always very much appreciated. We always like hearing what you guys have to say to take the conversation in a different direction potentially, and just get your guys' perspective on anything that we're talking about, especially on these live shows. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on any of the live shows, there's an easy way to do that just by using the super chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box, and that way it'll send in your super chat. Any host of the live shows can see it, they'll read it out loud, and that way we can carry on the conversation, maybe bring it to a different area that we weren't currently on. It always makes the show much more entertaining and much more interactive, so we're always in favor of that. And just let us know what you're thinking, hit the super chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, hit the $ at the bottom of the chat box and just let us know what's on your mind on anything regarding any of these topics. But now that we could start officially with the show going forward, we're going to preview one of the playoff games right off the bat, looking at the Chargers and the Texans game, the first game that we have on the playoff schedule this upcoming weekend. This game is set to take place on Saturday it's set to take place at 4:30. I almost said 1 o'clock. It's set to take place at 4:30 on Saturday. It's the first game on the schedule for these playoffs, and this is the 4-5 matchup in the AFC. Our first game, like I said, of this year's playoffs in Houston, because Houston is the division winner, and the Chargers got a little bump up in their win last week to the number 5 seed over the Steelers that dropped down 1 spot to the 6 seed. So this is a area where, the Texans are going to be trying to repeat what happened last year. They hosted a playoff game last year against the Cleveland Browns, and they absolutely smoked them. So they're going to try and repeat that this upcoming Saturday against a Chargers team that believes that they're really trying to change the narrative, that they're not the same old Chargers team. And I think they've convinced a lot of people, including myself, that this is just not the same old Chargers team that looks exciting. They get into the playoffs and they just completely drop the ball once they realize it's a different aspect, a different scenario in playoff football. I don't feel like I'm talking about the same team. And as we get more into it, we'll talk more about that. But this is one of 2 wildcard games where the road team actually comes in as the favorite. As of right now, the Chargers are the favorites in this game, only by 3 points. And like I mentioned before, the Chargers earned this spot by winning 3 of their last games, along with the loss that the Steelers had that helped them move up to this spot. And like we talked about before, I thought this was the most favorable matchup that anybody could get. Not really as a disrespect to the Houston Texans, but much more of a, I guess, as a positive aspect for the Ravens, the Bills, and the Chiefs. I just think they're at a different level, and the Texans are a lot younger than all those other teams, right? They have a lot more experience, playoff experience on those sides rather than the Houston Texans do. But I mean, it's the playoffs, right? Anything can happen. But to me, if we're going to talk about it like that, I felt like the Texans gave you the best opportunity to win, and clearly I wasn't too far off because the Chargers are the favorites on the road. And more on this game, I mean, I mentioned how the Chargers won their last 3 games. Houston has also, won 3 of their last 5 games, but those 2 losses that they had were to Kansas City and to Baltimore in some pretty ugly results, right? They basically got shut out by the Ravens at home and against the Chiefs. It was pretty close, but they unfortunately lost one of their weapons in Tank Dell. So that left a very sour taste in their mouth. And moving forward on this matchup specifically, these are 2 teams that have never met before actually in the playoffs. The last time the Chargers were in the playoffs, it was a 27-point collapse to the Jacksonville Jaguars, which was the 3rd largest comeback in playoff history. That was only a couple seasons ago, where Brandon Staley was still the coach over there in Los Angeles, and that wasn't even too far away from where we are now, but it feels like almost an eternity away just because of how different this Chargers team looks and plays and almost acts in a way as well. Everything about them, has changed. Credit to Jim Harbaugh. So that's very reassuring if you're a Chargers fan. And more on this matchup, these 2 teams have only met 9 times before because of how pretty recent, the Texans are as a franchise pretty much. And in those 9 meetings, the Chargers actually have the advantage over the Texans with a 6-3 record. And also the Chargers have won 4 times when playing in Houston as well. And on the Texans side of things, this is C.J. Stroud's first time ever playing the Los Angeles Chargers as well. So, I mean, C.J. Stroud, just on that note, 1-1 in his early playoff record. He played very well last year, and that was only his first year. You'd hope that he'd build on that, right, going into this year, and hopefully kind of put all these 50-50 narratives away on them, because I'm sure a lot of people like myself are feeling unsure about the Texans just based on their health and how they're playing. So CJ Stroud's obviously going to have a big impact on that going into this game. And now looking at the more negative side of this matchup and looking at some of the injuries, offensive lineman Shaq Mason for the Houston Texans did not participate in practice so far this week. He's been dealing with a knee injury, and now that I'm looking at the injury reports up until this point, with Shaq Mason not having practiced so far, he has already been ruled out for the Houston Texans, so he's not going to be able to play until the divisional round if the Texans get there. John Mechie, one of their wide receivers, has been dealing with a shoulder. He's still questionable, as well is defensive lineman D'Amico Autry. They were both limited in practice yesterday. I'm pretty sure they were at least limited or full participants today, but they are still labeled as questionable going into these games. And then the 2 biggest ones come on the side of the Los Angeles Chargers, because both of their wide receivers, Joshua Palmer and Quentin Johnson, are dealing with injuries. Joshua Palmer is a little bit more severe. He's already been ruled out with the foot injury that he's been dealing with, so he's not going to be able to play. While Quentin Johnson, he's still labeled as questionable on here, dealing with a thigh issue and as well as an illness now. So that'll be pushed a little bit closer to game time, or at least tomorrow we're going to have a better idea of it. But for right now, he is still labeled as questionable. And for a Chargers team that already offensively isn't, blowing anybody away, those are huge losses if Quentin Johnson is also unable to play. And then, before we get into our matchups, one thing I'd like to see from each of these teams, a goal in mind that I want to see them accomplish in order for them to reach the ultimate, prize, right? Reaching the victory in this game. For the Chargers is, I really want to see them try and impose their will right away as the visiting team. And not only as the visiting team, but to kind of prove to everybody that they're really all about the run game, that they are this tough-nosed, gritty team that they are perceived as, but maybe some people aren't really buying it. And what better way to do it than going out there and bullying the home team and ended up winning the game overall. And I think they're able to do it because this Houston Texans team, in some of their losses, they've given up a lot of rushing yards to these running backs, like against the Tennessee Titans in that surprising win by the Titans in Houston. Tony Pollard ran for 119 yards. Derrick Henry ran for 147 yards a couple weeks ago when also the Ravens traveled to Houston. And the Kansas City Chiefs as a whole team also rushed for 124 yards. So with J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, I think they're very capable of doing that, and I think that should be a point of emphasis for them going into this game. And then for the Texans, for them, I think it's a lot simpler, just in the matter of I feel like they have to do everything they can to try and disrupt Justin Herbert as much as they can. Bring a lot of pressure, try to man them up, going in man coverage specifically, and seeing how successful you are with bringing Will Anderson, with bringing Danielle Hunter, obviously, with having Christian Harris rush the passer as well. Bring all these guys to kind of be in Justin Herbert's face, make him uncomfortable, knock him down, just make his rhythm very off. Because up until this point, Justin Herbert's been very rhythmic. He's had everything out in time. Everything's going very smoothly for this offense. So I think if you throw off the timing a little bit, kind of like the Lions did with the Minnesota Vikings, especially now that Joshua Palmer's not playing, I think it's going to be huge for them. And they got the guys to do it, which leads us into the matchups. One of them that I'm looking at is Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter, the cornerbacks for the Houston Texans, going up against Ladd McConkey and potentially Quentin Johnson. What's interesting about this is Ladd McConkey and Kamari Lassiter playing on opposite sides. They're both rookies, and they both played at the University of Georgia. They were actually teammates, so that would be super, just neat of a fact that, they're playing against each other in their first playoff game. Probably going to be matched up against each other a couple times, so that's going to be a fascinating matchup. And Derek Stingley, whether he's on Ladd McConkey or Quentin Johnson, has been voted to a Pro Bowl this year as well, so he has also not gone unnoticed as well. So especially if they want to implement the goal and the strategy that I just suggested with pressuring Justin Herbert a lot, you're going to need Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter to be successful in man coverage. And I think they're capable of doing that with those guys that they have in their secondary. And then the other matchup that I'm looking forward to is just basically the offensive line going up against the defensive line of each team and vice versa, right? We have Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa against the Houston Texans offensive line that has had C.J. Stroud sacked the second most amount of times in the NFL, while on the other side of things, you got Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter going up against a Chargers offensive line with a rookie at the tackle position, and Justin Herbert, who's been sacked the seventh most amount of times, 41 times to be exact. So both these guys are in the top 10 of being sacked in terms of quarterbacks. So which pass rush can be more successful, and especially now that we know Shaq Mason isn't playing, that could be another weak point that the Chargers should try and exploit and really throw C.J. Stroud off his game, especially with all those injuries. You kind of know which way he's going to be looking towards in Nico Collins. So right now, I would say the matchup is a little bit more in favor of the Chargers because of those injuries. And for our final predictions here, who I think is going to win in the first playoff game that we have, I would like to go with the Los Angeles Chargers just because I like how first-year defensive coordinator Jesse Minter and this Chargers defense can really get after C.J. Stroud. I was under the impression that Shaq Mason was probably going to play, but now that he's also out and, it's unfortunate that CJ doesn't have all of his weapons. I think that's going to be a real problem for them to kind of make him uncomfortable and force him to make some tight throws where maybe it could lead to some turnovers. So I like that about the Chargers, along with the fact that, I just trust Justin Herbert a little bit more. I think we're really starting to see the kind of quarterback that he really is when he has a coach like Jim Harbaugh and a system that really benefits him. I just trust him a little bit more than C.J. Stroud up until this point, just based on what I've seen so far this season. So I'm going to go with the Chargers. They're going to get the road victory and move on to potentially play the Chiefs or the Bills, depending on other results. But speaking of other playoff games, we're going to preview another one here to start the show. The second game that we have coming up this upcoming weekend, this one between the Ravens and the Steelers. Another AFC North matchup between these two. It's the tiebreaker. The Ravens have won one. The Steelers have won one. Who's going to come away with the ultimate tiebreaker in the playoffs? I'll let you guys know that when we return after this break.